Since January 2004, police have been able to store the DNA samples of everyone they arrest, 4.5 million people to date, 1 in 5 of them with no criminal record. But the European Court of Human Rights ruling now criticises what it calls the blanket and indiscriminate nature of keeping such information. The 2 men from Sheffield who brought the case, a 45-year-old Michael Marper, who was arrested for harassing his partner but never charged. The other, a teenager identified as S, arrested and charged with attempted robbery but later acquitted. But police and victims' rights campaigners point out that hundreds of violent rapes and murders have been solved precisely because such data was kept. These include the case of James Lloyd, also from the Sheffield area, the so-called shoe rapist, jailed only 2 years ago for 8 attacks dating back more than 20 years. He was eventually traced through his sister's DNA when she was arrested for drink driving. Another serial rapist, Anthony Dubois from Surrey, was arrested but never charged over an alleged theft. But thanks to the DNA samples stored from that arrest, he was eventually jailed for 13 years for his attacks on teenage girls. The Home Secretary has said she's disappointed, pointing out that DNA and fingerprint evidence provide the police with more than 3,500 matches a month, and that the existing law would remain in place while ministers considered the European judgment.
This is an absolutely fantastic judgment. It's one of the strongest judgments we've ever seen from the European Court in relation to the UK, and it emphasises that where you have scientific developments, even though they can be beneficial to detect crime, that does have to be balanced against the privacy interests of individuals, and you can't have what they call a blanket and indiscriminate policy like this. I think you need to draw several distinctions. Firstly, this judgment doesn't prevent DNA being used to solve crime. DNA can continue to be used. It only affects retaining DNA from innocent people. Secondly, the figures put forward by the government are quite misleading. 3,000 matches a month doesn't mean that 3,000 people a month are convicted using DNA. The government will never say how many of those matches actually result in identifying a suspect. The match could be with the victim. And they never say how many of those matches result in convictions, how many would not otherwise have been found. So the match figure doesn't really demonstrate the benefit of the DNA database at all.
You said that if the police want it, they should get it.
No, I think
well, you know,
we should
as Nicola just said to you,
absolutely.
as Nicola just said, well, my goodness, how far you've travelled. No wonder Labour's in the trouble. It is
I don't
in
think
Scotland.
There's anything
you might as well put a camera.
Look,
victims. You might as well put a camera up everybody's jumper. You might as well have a camera in everybody's house. Then there would be no crime, but there would be no liberty either. You see, the balance that is being talked about by the civilised political voices on this platform is a genuine and serious argument. But I had this discussion on radio just the other night. People informed me, educated me about the danger of planting DNA on crime scenes. I was told that some criminals go around collecting cigarette butts and drop them at the scenes of crime precisely because somebody else's DNA is at the scene of the crime. We can't trust this government not to lose the information, misuse the information, sell the information, privatise the information. We can't trust the state at all.
The information held on you and your children will be used to stop crimes being committed even before they've taken place.
If we're not prepared to predict and intervene far more early, then there are children that are going to grow up in families that we know perfectly well are completely dysfunctional, and the kids a few years down the line are going to be a menace to society and actually a threat to themselves.
I'm interested in how early, because a lot of the evidence suggests you need to be getting in there while the child is still in nappies, frankly.
Or pre-birth, even. Or pre-birth, even. Or pre-birth, even. Or pre-birth, even.
There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is perfect. I agree.
The Minnesota Department of Health
has been collecting the blood and DNA of the children of Minnesota for over 10 years. The department did that without statutory authority or without any parent consent or knowledge. And in March of 2007, a judge said that the 2006 genetic privacy law would require the Department of Health to get informed parent consent for both the genetic testing of the program as well as the collection of the blood and the retention of the blood, and for research, genetic research on the blood. The department decided that they would appeal that decision. They lost the appeal, and now they have come to the legislature asking for the newborn genetic program to be exempted from the state genetic privacy law. And one of the things that the people of Minnesota need to understand about that is that there are 73,000 children born every year, and the blood and DNA of those children now become state property of the Minnesota government. That means that the government holds onto the DNA and can provide that DNA for genetic research on the children of this state. In 18 years, every child turns a voting adult, and their DNA will still be the property of the state of Minnesota. So what we're saying is, if there is a genetic privacy law here in Minnesota, as there is, why are we going to exempt the DNA of every citizen born since July of 1997 from that genetic privacy law and continue that exemption in perpetuity? Because clearly that means that the genetic privacy of all the citizens of Minnesota starting since 1997, or at least since those who were born in 1997, that they don't have genetic privacy. In 2005, one of the leaders in newborn genetic testing came to the President's Council on Bioethics to essentially warn the council about just expanding the number of tests on children ad infinitum. He pointed out that the history of PKU testing has its own dark side, and he talked about the fact that states are going to begin actual DNA sequencing of children. And he warned the council that we really should not rush into the expansion of these tests, and he's actually was very concerned that this would be, I think he called it a calamity for the children and for the parents and for the families of this country.